Okay everyone, so now we are learning the compilation process of any language and we are then comparing with the .NET application. Let's say we are taking any language, say example VB or a C language. Now, so on the left hand side we are having the compilation process of any language. Now assume that first of all whenever we are going on the coding, so we write the code. Let's say this is the code which we write. Let's say I am giving them let's say code here. Now what will be happen with this code? We know that if you write the code in C, C++, Visual Basic, any of the language, now there is a compiler. You can see that here the compiler is there. Let's say VB compiler. Now what the compiler will do? Compiler is going to convert that code, means compile it into the assembly. Now what is that assembly? We'll understand. So first of all, this code will be converted to the assembly and this is called the assembly. Now we know that whenever we compile a C, C++ or the any other code, let's say VB code, then it works directly on the system. Now what is that system? We know that we are having the operating system. So first of all, on our laptop or the machine, we install the operating system. Now whenever we compile the code, so this is the compilation. Whenever we compile it, it works directly on the operating system. Now, why that code work on the operating system? Because you understand that our operating system work on the native code. What is that native code? We know that the other name of native code is called the machine code. So all the language like 0101, the binary language, that is called the machine code or that is called the native code. So whenever we create the code and we compile it, that is converted to assembly. If I talk about a normal programming language, now that assembly is nothing but the native code or the machine code. So I can simply say that whenever we are working on any of the language and we are compiling, so our code is converted to the machine code. So if we talk about a simple language, if I write a program code, then compiler convert that to the machine code and that machine code run on the operating system. So that is the simple process. Now if we understand this diagram here, now you can see that first of all we are having the VB. Let's say we are having C, C++ or Visual Basic, any language. Now we know that it is a non-.NET application because this diagram we are considering that this is for the non-.NET application. So this code whatever we are writing here, now the compiler will compile that. Why it is written VB compiler? Because every language is having their own compiler. Let's say C is having its own compiler, VB is having its own compiler. So now the code is converted to the assembly. We know that assembly is the main part of the program from where program run. Let's say if we are having multiple pages of a project, now that one page, from that the project will start. Let's say if you are going to install a setup, in the setup that is the file, one file from where whole setup started. So that one file is called the assembly. Mostly you know that the DLL file or the exe file is called as the assembly. So any application is going to convert the main code into the assembly and that is into the native code or the machine code and that machine code run on the operating system directly. So this is the process of any language. If we go on the simple words, now the language is compiled into the machine code and machine code run on the operating system. So that is the simple process of any language. Now we are going on the .NET application. So if we talk about the .NET application here, so first of all, let's say I am assuming here also I am writing the code. So this is the code which I am writing into the .NET. So this is my code. Let's say I am assuming any of the language like VB.NET, C#.NET. Now what is going to happen? Similarly in the .NET we are having the compiler. So compiler is again going to compile it. So let's say this is again assembly which is going to create here. So if my code is compiled, now it will be converted to the assembly. But the interesting thing about the .NET is that this assembly is not a native code. No, it is not the machine code, because we know that machine code and native code are same. So that means this assembly is not a machine code. That means this assembly cannot run on the operating system directly. So this assembly is what? This assembly is the intermediate language. It is some kind of intermediate code. Just like if you talk about the Java, whenever we make the project in Java and we compile it, it is converted to the bytecode. Similarly, if you talk about the .NET, whenever we write any of the code, we compile it. It is converted to the intermediate language. Now, what is that intermediate language? Why the operating system cannot understand? This intermediate language is a language that user cannot understand and then operating system cannot understand. That means if I was the user who developed the code, so I am the user here, I cannot understand it. And if I am the operating system, I cannot understand it. Means not the user, not the operating system, both cannot understand. Then who can understand this? Yes, .NET can understand it only. That means whenever a developer write the code, .NET compile it into its own language, which is called intermediate language or MSIL, Microsoft Intermediate Language, because this is the part of Microsoft. Now, what is the purpose and what is the feature of converting this intermediate language? So now we are understanding with the help of the client server. Now let's say we are having a system here. We assume that this is my system and I am the client here. So I am representing with the C. Now there is some server, let's say I am representing with the S. We know that client put the request to server and server fulfill it. So that is a relation. Let's say I want to open the Facebook in my system. So on the browser I write facebook.com and Facebook open in my system. So that is a relation between client and server. Now let's suppose the Facebook code is in C programming or in the VB or in C++. Now what will happen? The original file from the server will be coming to the C. C means client. So from the server, original files are coming to the client, because if we talk about the compilation process here, then there is no intermediate code available. So we has to give the original code to the client. If I am the server, I am giving the original code to you. What is the problem? The problem is that whenever the server is giving original code to the client can change it and claim that this Facebook is mine. Now simply by changing the name, client claim that this is my code and client can sell it. So that is really a disadvantage. So if you talk about the Java and .NET here, now here we are having the intermediate language, which is called IL. Now if we modify this procedure, now from the server we compile the project, convert to the IL. IL is the intermediate language that user cannot understand. Now I am sending this file from server to client. This side we are sending it. Now number one, it is totally secure. Secure because bytecode or intermediate language. Bytecode if we talk about Java, intermediate code if I talk about .NET. So these are the more secure. Means nobody can read it. If user cannot read it, obviously you cannot modify it. So it is more secure. Now also it is safe. When it reaches to the client side, let's say if the Facebook is open, now client cannot just change the coding because client cannot see the coding. So that's why this intermediate language is very much important. If I have to share my project with other person, I will share my intermediate language, means I will compile it, share my intermediate language, and nobody can change it. Let's take another example. If I have developed a software, let's say Windows I have developed, maybe Windows 10. Can I give you the original code of Windows 10? No. I will create a setup. Setup means installation file. So I will provide you installation file so that you can install it, but you cannot change it. So original code you are not having, you are having the intermediate language. So in the .NET we call that is intermediate language, and if you talk about Java, we call it as the bytecode. So the Java and .NET both frameworks are almost like same because they work on the double compilation. So in one step of compilation we are having the intermediate language, which is very much secure. Nobody can read it except only the application, and we can share it very easily. So now the step one of compilation is over. If we talk about the .NET application here, now we have compiled it. Now we should understand why this intermediate language is very much important. If I take case number one, if I am using client server application, then from server I am sending a code which nobody can read, nobody can modify in between, not even the client. So that's why we need this intermediate language. Let's say if I take the example of the Android. If we are designing a game in the Android, then we are converting the game into some intermediate language, like we are having APK file. Now that we upload on the Play Store, so anybody can download and play it. So that is a code which nobody can read. So that file we create. So that file is the intermediate language. So in the .NET we say it is the intermediate language. In the Java we say it is the bytecode. It is purely safe and secure. Now let's assume if we talk about the client server, now client is having the intermediate language now. So what is going to happen? How client would run it? So here afterward, this intermediate language will be further converted to the native code or the machine code. So again it is converted. So here the box which I am showing you, and this box represents the native code or the machine code. So this one can work on the operating system now, because we know that operating system work on the machine code or the native code. What is that? 0101 language which operating system understands. So it is again converted. So that means we are compiling it one more time. So that's why this is the second compilation. So if we see that in the compilation 1, our code is converted to the intermediate language. Now in the compilation 2, intermediate language is converted back to the machine code. Now this machine code can work on the operating system. So this is how the first difference between other language and the .NET application is that in the other languages like C, C++, VB, we are having one step of compilation. In the .NET, we are having two steps of the compilation, so that intermediate language is created, which is very much secure. Now assume that the client is having the intermediate language. Now how can a client run it? So client need a CLR. CLR is the common language runtime. So common language runtime is just like a platform where the intermediate language run. Just like if you talk about the Java, in the Java we are having JVM. JVM is a Java virtual machine on which the bytecode run. Similarly, if you talk about the .NET, in the .NET we are having the CLR, common language runtime. Here the intermediate language IL can run. So what CLR do? CLR is going to convert this intermediate language to the native code, and we know that native code is nothing but the machine code. So the conversion of intermediate language to the machine code is done with the help of JIT compiler, just in time compiler, and this is the part of CLR. If I take the example of the Android, let's say I am the developer, I developed the code. Now afterward, I don't want that nobody can take my code, so I just compile it into the intermediate language. Now to run that intermediate language means if you are downloading the Android game, you need an Android platform on your phone. So similarly, if you are downloading an intermediate language, then you need the CLR. So if you are having the CLR in your system, only then that intermediate language can work. Similarly, if the client want to run the intermediate language, so client should be having the CLR. Or if you talk about the Java, if you want to run the bytecode, then you need the JVM, Java Virtual Machine. So we need a CLR to run the intermediate language on our system. So that is the first difference, that we are having the two-step compilation into the .NET application. Now if we see here, now first of all you can see that in the .NET we are having multiple languages like C Sharp, VB, C++, J Sharp, any other language. Now these all are the .NET application, and here we are having compiler using respective language compiler. Now you should understand this, why we are compiling using the respective language, because C Sharp will be compiled using the C Sharp compiler, VB with the VB compiler, J Sharp with the J Sharp compiler. So all the compilers are available with the .NET, and .NET compile it. So once my code is compiled, it converted to the assembly. And here the assembly means that file from which project can start, DLL or the exe file. And this is not the machine code or the native code like other languages. It is the intermediate language, which is very much secure and nobody can read it. Now this intermediate code I can send to anyone, or I can just give it to anyone in the pen drive, in the client server, or maybe the desktop application, anyhow. Now CLR is required. So with the help of CLR, it again convert the intermediate language to the machine code or the native code with the help of JIT compiler. Now this machine code can work on the operating system. So this is the second compilation step. So there are the two compilation there into the .NET application. So now we are going to learn the proper differences between the compilation of other language and the .NET application. So the first thing we should understand that in other languages we are having the single programming language. Let's say if we talk about the VB here, so this one is a single language, it can be C, C++, but if we talk about the .NET, here we are having the multiple languages. So here you can see that we are having the C Sharp, VB, C++, J Sharp, any other language. So in the .NET we are having the multiple languages. Now we know that whenever we compile the application, it converted to the assembly. And we know that assembly is very first file from where the project start. So here assembly contain the native code or the machine code. But if we talk about the .NET application, here also we know that if we compile the .NET application, here it also convert to the assembly, but here the assembly is not the native code or the machine code, here it is the intermediate language. Because in the other languages, we know that the assembly contain native code or the machine code, which can directly run on the operating system. That's why we can say that assembly directly run on the operating system. But similarly, if I compare this step with the .NET application, in the .NET we are having the intermediate language. And we know that intermediate language is not supported by the operating system. So that's why assembly cannot run on OS. So if you want to run this assembly on the OS, what we want? We need the CLR, because we know that CLR is required to run the assembly or the intermediate language. What the CLR is doing, which is Common Language Runtime, Common Language Runtime is having the JIT compiler. And in the JIT compiler, it is going to convert the intermediate language to the native code. So with the help of this compiler, the intermediate language will be converted to the native code, or we can say that JIT convert IL to specific machine code or the native code. What is the meaning of this specific native code? With the help of this JIT compiler, if you want that this application should be saved as per a specific operating system, then we can save it. That's why as per the specific application, we can save it. So that's why the word uses specific native code. So here we can see that in a normal application, we are having the single compiler. So here if we see in the VB, C or C++, so here we are having only one compilation process. So we can say that it is the single compilation. And if we talk about the single compilation, we know that if we are writing the code in VB, then we are converting this code to directly machine code or the native code, and this code run on the operating system, no problem. But if we talk about the .NET here, we are having the two compilation. So first of all, you can see that if I opt any of the language like C#, so then we are compiling it to the intermediate language. So this is the first compiler which we require. So this is the first step of compilation. Then afterward, this IL is again converted to the native code or the machine code with the help of the second compiler, which is the JIT compiler. So that's why in the .NET application we are having the two compilation, or we can say that two-step compilation. Now if we talk about the other languages, let's say VB, now here you can see that once we have created this machine code, now this can run on the OS. So that's why we can say that it is the OS specific application. Means let's say if I am having a Windows, now on the Windows if I am having the C or the VB, I just make the program and run it on the same system. So that's why we cannot transfer it anywhere. So we can say that it is the OS specific application. But this is not the case with the .NET application, because we know that in the .NET we are having is the IL. IL is the intermediate language. If I don't want to share my code with any person, so I will convert it to the IL. You are having various apps today that you download, but you cannot change it. That is the example of IL. You are sending your project to the customer. Customer can run it but cannot change it. That is also the example of IL. So what I am doing, I am sharing my apps, I am sharing my project. What is that? Portable. So that's why in the .NET we are having the portable application. Now one thing important to note here, we know that C# is the advanced version of C++. But here the C# and C++ both are mentioned. There is a reason behind it. Because if we talk about C#, if we talk about the VB, or if we talk about the J# or any other language, now they are having their set of features. Now what is the set of feature? Now these all languages work on the managed code, or we can say that these languages only generate the managed code. What is that managed code? IL that we are learning, that is the managed code. Means if you talk about C#, VB, J#, these languages only work with the managed code. Means if you want that they directly run on the OS, no, that is not the possibility. So C#, VB, J#, they will be having the two-step compilation only. They will be first converting the application to the intermediate language, then afterward they will run. So intermediate language is also named as the managed code, but this is not the same with the C++. So if we talk about the C++ here, C++ is the mixed. We know that there is a huge market of C++. That's why only with the C++ .NET is giving one more extra feature, that C++ can contain managed code as well as the unmanaged code. Now what is that managed code and the unmanaged code? We know that managed code is the intermediate language. So intermediate language is the managed code, and what is the unmanaged code? That native code or the machine code, that is called the unmanaged code. So the meaning is that C++ is only given with the option that C++ can contain the intermediate language. Means if you want that it should be shared, so you can work with the IL. IL means managed code. And if you want that, no, C++ project should be directly run on the system, no problem. You can be directly having the native code. So with the single compilation, you can be having. So only the C++ in the .NET can contain managed as well as unmanaged code, means IL and the native code, but all the other languages like C sharp, VB, J sharp, they are having only managed code, that means the intermediate language. So this is all about the difference between a normal language and the .NET application.